Go again?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. We'll change gears and then we'll go back to it. But go ahead and introduce yourself and what you teach and what you like about chemistry the most or something like that.
Everything. My name is Dr. Suroviec, Dr. Alice Suroviec. I'm the assistant chemistry professor here at Barrett College and chair of chemistry and biochemistry. My area of specialty is bioelectrochemistry. And so what I typically research is, if you're familiar with diabetes sensors, a way of sticking enzymes to surfaces and then getting the enzymes to recognize the analyte in solution. So we look at making the diabetes sensor more specific, so you need less blood and a faster response. So my interest is in kind of interface between chemistry and biology. So I teach gen chem, biochem, analytical chemistry, instrumental analysis, environmental chemistry, all the chemistries. Chemistry's awesome because everything works based on chemistry. So I could talk about chemistry for hours. Love chemistry.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so when did you first become familiar with PCBs?
So I live in West Rome. So obviously I knew about the GE factory plant and that it did make transformers. Some of our neighbors were workers at the GE plant, and so they would tell us some stories about the GE factory. And then 2 years ago, I taught the environmental chemistry class for the first time. That's when I spent a good portion of my time kind of really digging in to learn about different types of pesticides and POPs and how they are dealt with, how they're remediated. And to make the class relevant, I spent a lot of time kind of talking about how these are all around. And so Rome is actually a spot like Alabama and Hudson River where these stories become real and they actually affect real people.
Did some of those stories, when in your interactions with people from the community, were you ever hesitant? Did you feel like hesitant about explaining that there were health concerns with PCBs?
No, I guess the people I was speaking to knew that there were health concerns in retrospect. But at the time, they just thought it was normal behavior to bring home PCBs and use this as termite protection because it works great. But there are some longer-term health effects that are now known that weren't known then, especially when the GE factory closed down, that it became more obvious that PCBs might be a bigger thing than they thought.
Did you hear about them being used like as an agricultural lime in people's gardens?
Some people mentioned that they would use it as like a enhancer, which I don't know how that's possible. Like you would use it obviously for pesticide. So in that way, I guess you could think about it as an enhancer. But realistically, I think it was all in their head. I don't think you can actually grow better plants using PCBs. But
yeah, that's surprising. I mean, because I've heard that from multiple people that they used it in their gardens, and I thought, well, maybe as a pesticide, but
I can't imagine. I think if people had great gardens that were using PCBs, they were great gardeners. I think it probably would have mattered if they were using PCBs.
Did you hear from those folks about how GE made that accessible? Why were people able to access PCBs from GE?
I think it wasn't through necessarily very traditional routes. I think it was just more they're filling up the transformers and there was a little left over and you're either going to throw it out or take it home, and so they would take it home, and that's really all there was to it.
So regarding remediation, is it possible to remediate the community here, the waterways? I mean,
so yes and no. It is possible to remediate soil that has PCBs in it. It's a lot of cost. Because what you're going to do is you're going to take the soil, you're going to dig it up, and then you're going to send it through a thermal system that heats the soil to 1,000 degrees Celsius. That then should drive the PCBs into the gaseous state. They are then broken down and eventually converted into water and salt. But you can only do small amounts of dirt at a time, and you're looking at like a one-day process to do that much. So yes, in theory, you can remediate all that soil. Realistically, what remediation typically consists of is removing the soil that's contaminated and moving it to a certified landfill that accepts remediated soil, making sure it's a lined landfill, line it on top, cover it up, and walk away. In terms of waterways, like we saw in the Hudson River, in some ways it's better to leave it alone and just let more soil cover it and just let it be, rather than trying to dredge it up and end up kicking up all that PCBs back up into the environment, where then you kind of shut off that waterway for commercial fishing. So it's a yes and. It is technically possible to remediate. In some ways it's more cost efficient and better at this point to leave it alone.
Do you think that it's okay to eat fish from the Coosa?
Like I said before, I think it's probably fine, as long as it's not the main source of your diet. The occasional once-a-week fish from the Coosa, probably fine. If you are eating fish from the Coosa every day for an extended period, you may start to see some health effects from that. So,
Would you eat a fish from the Coosa?
I mean, I don't like fish, but if I was a fish eater, I would at least try. Yeah, I don't think I'd have any problems with that. Kind of bony though, they're little tiny fish. No.
Well, there's some decent
Have
sized
you seen some decent sized ones?
Oh, we filmed people pulling them right there, and yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have lots of footage
Okay.
of people pulling decent sized fish out of there at the lock and dam.
That's okay. That makes more sense over
Yeah.
there. It's much cooler.
Yeah.
Because usually where I'm at, the water's real shallow. No fish, except for the little.
There is concern that that's the spot where the
most
concentration.
contained, yeah.
That's the concentration, is that spot.
Yeah.
Because as everything gets moved, it gets kind of stuck there on those shoals.
Yeah.
What do you think the people of Rome should be educated more about this issue?
I think that definitely being aware that PCBs are probably in the rivers around us and Garden lakes, that if you are fishing there, that you should not be eating your main diet from those fish. That the occasional fish is fine, but that you shouldn't be existing only off of fish, which again would only affect a small part of the population, but they may not be the most educated part of the population to know about that, so it seems reasonable to do more education.
Do you think what GE is doing with the property now is it the proper approach to management of that kind of a contaminated site?
Yeah, from what I know, they've done their best using what techniques we have now, which is to remove the soil from the area and pay to have it buried in a appropriate landfill. It's going to be a long process to remediate the whole property, and in some ways what they've done right now in leaving it alone is actually probably the most economically feasible and probably does the least damage for now until a better technique comes around to remediate what's left of the factory.
So I could ask you about the bike trails, but I would assume, based on what you've already said, that it's no big deal having bike trails.
Unless you're planning on like eating the dirt out there, in which case you have bigger issues. You should be fine, that because you're biking out there, it's realistically not enough to be worried about.
There's some dirt eating cultures, and I don't know if they're in Rome or not, but
There are. I guess if they were in Rome, then we would have an issue. What did we miss, guys?
I think that was really good. I mean,
It was great.
Yeah,
Oh,
PCBs are stable
fantastic.
molecule and long lasting because that's why they're invented, because they don't break down. They're
Yeah.
great for transformers in that once you fill them up, it's not going anywhere. You don't ever have to refill them, which is why there are still PCB containing transformers around, because until they spring a leak, they're really great just to be left alone. So it's a trade-off, right? Economics versus the feel-good part of it, right? Are you saving the environment versus cost?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
So the name of the film is going to be Dredge.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the whole issue is, do you dredge this information up? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
by making a documentary, do you dredge the river? And so, the whole lock and dam thing is crazy, though.
Yeah.
That the city didn't, think through that part of it. And then they passed a splost and thought they were going to redo the whole downtown and have boats going back and forth from Lake Wise and stuff. And then they had to back off.
It is. That's tricky.
I have a question actually.
This way.
If there's been a recent flood event or something and all that sediment gets kicked up and the river's really browned out, I kayak a lot and I go over to the lock and dam and play in the rapids. Do you think if that, and I do get water in my mouth, which I don't usually care about because, like you say, it's in the soil, if it has been kicked up?
I mean, again, you're such a large organism on the scale of things, you're going to be fine.
Trace amounts.
Yeah, it's going to be such trace amounts that you're going to be able to, pee that out in a matter of days.
Yeah, okay.
If you were a smaller organism, I'd be more concerned. Like a smaller human, if they were drinking a lot of the water,
Yeah, okay.
then yeah.
Just I always think about it.
And then it's fat soluble, so it's probably in mother's milk. If mom is
Right. If mom is eating a heavy diet of local fish,
Mhm.
then that could be another way of transmitting it to a smaller person.
I also
Child.
have one question.
Ask away.
I read in a study, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's called in situ capping,
Okay.
and so pretty much they would just put another layer of dirt on top of the sediments,
Yeah.
and then they insert electrodes, which I'm not sure how this doesn't affect the actual water, if anybody was into water, but it somehow stimulates the microbes.
Yeah.
In the
So
soil.
there are a few known microbes that eat PCBs and convert them into salt and water. They're pretty specialized, so they can be grown in a lab, but they don't exist really well in the natural. So you can't just like throw them in the river, because that's right. Again, people will be like, "Well, just throw them in the river." Well, then that's like a whole cascade of other issues. So yeah, there are some microbes. They work really slowly. They're pretty specialized. But yeah, there are techniques that you could take small areas of soil and remediate it by using these little tiny bacteria microbes to eat up the PCBs and convert them
Okay.
into something.
So it probably wouldn't be viable on a
I
large
mean,
scale.
it would be right now.
Okay.
We don't have